Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and IP Labs.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Tracy Gunn, who's from Exitable, and Tracy's coming to us from New Hampshire. Hi, Tracy. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. Hello from New Hampshire. Yay.
You've got an interesting story as a business owner who ran multiple businesses and was trying to find a way out. Can you share the story of how that experience led into what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So I was like many of you, small business owner, often have ADHD, I want more of this. So I started with a candy store, then I wound up with a restaurant, then I did another restaurant, then another candy store because, business ADHD. And one day I just was done. I just had hit the wall. I was standing in my bar. It was closing time, and
little semisonic playing closing time.
Exactly. And, and I was like frustrated with my staff, and I was like tired of like my customers and all the things that I had, looking around at the prison, the business I had built for myself. And I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And so for me, I just thought, I'll hire a broker. He'll help me. I'll get out of this. I'll be able to do what I want to do. Right. Because that's what most of us, we start these things usually because we want some kind of freedom.
Right.
So I hired a broker. And his name is Bill, and he's a nice man, but like I laid it all out for him, like, here's what I want to do. I want to sell, I had all these dreams of exiting. And he was like, sorry, Tracy, your best bet is just to liquidate. There's nothing really worth selling. And it was like a punch in the gut. Like,
wow.
Like, are you kidding me?
How long had you been doing this candy store?
So I had the first candy store for 12 or 13 years at that point. I had the restaurant, one for 3 years, one for 2 years. And the new candy store was only like a year old. And this is pre-COVID. But I just, I kept thinking, like every business owner, like, I can do this. I got this. It's fine. Everything's fine. And then I had a grandbaby and everything kind of shifted, like, well, I want to go or whatever. Yeah. So when he basically said I couldn't do anything with it and he couldn't help me, and he was like going to be my, hero, fixer.
Your advocate. He was supposed to be working for you.
He was supposed to be, yeah. And I just was like,
his incentive would be to get you the most money possible as a broker.
Correct. Not tell me to liquidate. So I'll be honest, I cried a little. And then I just thought to myself,
right now,
you feel bad for me, right? And the thing is, I think this is, that's his job, right? His job is to sell businesses, and he obviously wants a job that's easy, not hard. And my businesses would have been hard for him to sell. So what I figured out for me was that I could, I built it. I had sales, I had customers. Like, it can't all be bad. And so I gave myself 6 months to fix it. Like, to fix the things, whatever he was seeing that I wasn't seeing, and what he wasn't seeing that I did see, I was going to just fix the things. And I gave myself 6 months. And so I'll be honest, like, it was hard. It took a lot of work and effort and research because I didn't have anybody helping me. I was just figuring it out. Right. But I'll tell you, I fixed some things really. Some were really fast. Some took a little longer, but I found a buyer in 3 months.
So what were those things that because you had to basically reevaluate your businesses,
Correct.
right? You had to look at, you had to step outside, take the emotion out of it, and say,
yeah.
So what were like the top 3 things you saw that said, okay, if I fix this, this, and this, it's a more appealing as a business?
Yeah. So first, even before I started fixing anything, I had to see what did he not see? Right. Because I saw value there. We had money coming in. It was almost $1 million a business, top line business. So like, what was I missing? So I did like take a step back and think, okay, what am I missing that's not what he can't see the value. Right. So that was number one. And then number 2 is I kind of like thought, well, what do I want? right? Do I want to just liquidate? Because I could have just lit a match and walked away. I mean,
Mhm.
that was a possibility,
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. People do that all the time.
right?
It's just
All the time.
that's not what you wanted to do. You're a builder, not a liquidator.
Correct. So I was like, okay, first, what do I want? So I chose what I wanted. I was going to fix it 6 months. I gave myself a deadline. And then number two, and then I wanted to sell it for something. It didn't have to be millions of dollars, but I wanted to get something back, right? I put all this effort in, gave up time, money, energy, family events, all that stuff, right? I wanted to get paid back in some way. And so I figured out what I wanted. Then I thought, okay, he says my valuation 0. Why? What am I missing? So I didn't have great profitability because, like most business owners, I used my business like a piggy bank and I reinvested in it. And it was on the newer side. So I was still paying off things. So I knew I'd increase profitability. I knew that I was too involved in my business and I need to set up some better systems that could get me out of it. So that was the second part. So I did identify what I was going to fix, but I also identified what were my main pain points. Like what made me want to pay someone to take this away from me? What made me want to set it on fire and walk away, right? And so I identified those things. So if I knew that if I could figure out those couple things, it wouldn't be so painful every day. I wouldn't feel so done.
Right.
And so those were the three things. I figured out like, what would I want? What was I missing in the valuation piece? Like understanding what is it worth and why, the pieces that put that together, and what could I fix quickly? And what did I really need to fix for my own mental health? Right. So those are kind of the three things that I did. And I did that the first month. Like the first month, I just dove into those things.
For example, you bought some equipment you're paying on because you were expecting to have this restaurant around for a while.
Yep.
But now you're realizing, oh my gosh, now I've got too much money going in to pay this up. So what do you do?
So like, I'll give you an example. So first, like sometimes tech has some of the answers. So for example, one thing that makes a business valuable is knowing who your customers are, having a good database or a way to communicate with them. And so as a bar, we had a POS system that was not tracking my customers. Now, most people use a credit card. You have their information. So we instituted that I already own. All I had to do was teach my staff to set up our loyalty program. Now I could tell you who came in, how often, how much they spent, right? And I had a way to communicate with them, make them an offer, get them in this week. We're doing this thing, right? So all of a sudden, through tech that I already own, just had to turn it on and teach my girls who, frankly, they were able to give a free appetizer for signing up. Customers happy, staff, because I had waitresses, staff happy. And now I have the data. All of a sudden now I have a couple thousand people of regular customers that I can know who they are, what they order, what they like. I mean, all that info that I hadn't tapped into before.
Because that's one of the things I think when people look at selling their business, they tend to look at the fixed assets and things. They don't look at the customer base as the actual asset. That they kind of overlook that, but that's actually probably what you're selling is the customer base.
Yeah, because if those people stop coming, right, food changes. And if you have people who are coming on a regular basis, if you transition and you have a new owner, but they don't like them as much and the food changes, right, that the business could be gone just like that. So I had to make it not about Tracy, but about the consistency and about really connecting the business to them, right? To build in some loyalty and sometimes that requires giving. But let's be honest. I mean, in a restaurant, what does, an app cost $8-9, but then they buy dinner and drinks. It was a big bar and they consider you and you've now given something. Well, now there's a little bit, of reciprocity.
Right.
Which is great. So like that was one thing that I did. And that, again, I already had the tech. Right. So like, who are your customers? Where do you find them? How do you communicate with them? Do they gather? Do they gather with me? Like, can I communicate with them? Those are things to think about.
Right.
Because again, when you're in it and doing all the time, it's hard to do that, right? It's hard to just get outside of it. And now I had a reason. And I will say this, for me, once I decided I want to be done, It was a shift of working 16, 18-hour days on the business, in the business. I took a lot of that time and shifted it towards exiting the business.
Right.
Whether or not it was going to work, but I just took that energy and shifted it. So now I could work on those things that would build my assets, that would build my profitability.
Because there's a lot of people who, sadly, in the photo industry, who have retail locations or operations, and they're not set up for that, unfortunately. Right. And when it comes time to sell, whether they've had a family event, or they've just reached retirement age, or they're just burnt out, they're not in a position to sell, sadly enough. So you were very fortunate. Did you get what you wanted, or did you have to settle?
I settled a little, but I got what I wanted in the sense that I was able to get out. Because I had 4 businesses I was trying to fix, right? Not just one. So I took the biggest headache and I just dedicated my time and energy there so that I could, because that was the one that was taking the most time. It was the newest. It was the biggest. It was the one that I thought should be worth the most. And so, and honestly, part of that whole planning process is who's going to buy it, right? Thinking about that in your plan of, okay, if I'm going to sell, who the heck's going to buy it? And who might be interested, and then thinking about what would they be looking for.
Right. Marketing 101, because what you're really saying is you're finding a customer to buy your business, right? You're not, you have to make it more appealing to them, and you have to kind of visualize who's going to buy it, right? Now, was the purchaser, the restaurant specifically, were they customer, or
they were a customer sitting at my bar? Because I had been talking, again, I was very in my business, meaning like, it was a 6,500 square foot bar and restaurant. I mean, the bar sat 40. So I was out there chatting and making sure things were going. And because I didn't have management in place, because I just wasn't there. But I had like a bar manager, a kitchen manager. So I had people, but just I was always out there and friendly and chatting. And I was talking about what I was doing, even then. But this guy, the fascinating part was this guy had never owned a business before. This is what he wanted to do with his retirement money. You never know. I know, well, he's crazy. But the thing is like, because when restaurants hard, it's hard. I mean, all business is hard, but restaurants a lot of work, and the margins are not, you think there's margins, but there's not a lot of margin. And so anyway, and he approached me. I was just talking about it. He's like, would you sell it to me? And I was like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, so it just goes to show you never know. Like, and if you're putting out there, like, we're thinking about leaving, like, I'm trying to fix it because, like, I want my grandbaby, and there's nothing wrong with the business. Like, I'm not saying, like, I hate my life, I hate my business. That's probably not a good idea to go out and talk about how you hate your business.
Right.
But, I want to retire. I want to go see my grandbabies. Those are good things. Those are just life transitions. I want to retire. Right. But I built this amazing thing, and I want to see it continue.
Right.
Not only for me, but for the economy, for my town, for my community, for my customers, all those reasons. I'm, a little different.
So you had the restaurant. You also had another eating establishment. Did that go with it, or how did you handle that?
It did not. That one, and all this happened right before COVID. And so the other restaurant I actually wound up liquidating only because my landlord decided they wanted to control my hours. And it was during COVID, and I was open, and actually really I was making money. I was profitable. It was an airport restaurant, and the landlord decided I had to be open certain hours, and I said no thank you. And so they basically told me I could bid on my own restaurant because I didn't own it, and it was an airport restaurant. It's not like I could have moved it down the block.
Right.
And so I was kind of stuck.
They knew that. They wanted to play hardball with
They got me. Yep. And so, and I'm a little bit stubborn, and I just thought, no, you're not going to I did not go into business for you to decide what's best for my business. And I was actually, my city owned the airport. And so I just thought, no, we're going to let it go. And so that one I liquidated. So I've actually done a purchase. I've done, a sale. I found the buyer. I did a liquidation, and I did an earn-in for my candy store. And another one I closed. So, I've done a little bit of everything, and I've learned so much, which kind of led me to what I'm doing now, which helping people to navigate this part, and not only navigate like when they're ready to go, but think about it way back when they start. Because
Right.
if
Exactly.
I had been smarter or really thought about
Mm-hmm.
not only how I wanted to grow it, but why I wanted to grow it to a certain level in a certain way, and been more educated, I would have made different decisions.
Right. Exactly. That's one of the things I think is very important, is that when you set up the business, you have to organize it in such a way that, that your outcome is the intention, right? So for example, if you plan on just shutting the door, then you do an LLC and you just whatever. But if you're planning on, let's say, your family taking it over, maybe you go with an S corp, so you can issue stock and do some different things. And that's where I think a lot of people overlook that piece when they set up the business, because that's where all the energy is these days, right? Be a business owner, startup, this is great. But they don't do the back end. And like you said, you were very fortunate. A, you were able to sell a giant restaurant before COVID. And B, you found a buyer relatively quickly, which again was probably great, because sometimes when you put a business up for sale, it can take a long time.
Well, and I mean, not to be a downer, but they say Biz by Sell says 85% of listed businesses don't sell. And that's for a lot of reasons. Obviously, sometimes they're crappy businesses, or sometimes they're really not businesses. Sometimes they're just jobs, right? Sometimes like the profitability is not there, but other times there's often not enough buyers. And that's kind of what the other part of why we started doing this is, in the next 5 years, all the boomers will retire. I mean, they're going to be in their 70s and they're done. And so all of those businesses in the next 5 years, 12 million of them, I believe, are going to be for sale in some way, shape, or form. Most of those boomers need to sell to retire, but there's not enough buyers.
Right.
So now we've got us not only thinking strategically about like, okay, if I'm going to be up against 12 million other businesses, what's going to make mine sell? How am I going to be the 15%, not the 85%?
Right.
And I think we could shift that to 15% to more like 40 or 50 if we talk to enough people.
Right.
But I think also it's also opening up our minds to different ways to exit, right? Whether a lot of people, seller, people are going to have to start being creative with financing. They're going to have to get more familiar and more comfortable with how they exit, because like you said, if I sold and somebody gave me, let's just say $200,000 in cash, well, I'm going to lose a lot of money tax-wise that way, right? So it doesn't always make sense to get it all up front.
Right.
Sometimes you can collect interest over 5 years and a balloon payment. There's all different ways to do that. So that's a whole other discussion. But I think when you think about the fact that there's not enough buyers, like you said, it sometimes takes a long time. Sometimes it's because it's not a great business, or it's in a dying industry, or it hasn't been set up in a way. And I talk to brokers a lot about this. Like, don't just tell them to liquidate because it's going to be hard. Maybe recommend them to us. We'll help them. And then magically they'll have a business that's sellable. And it doesn't have to be as hard.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and so yes, it does take a long time, and most don't sell. Eventually they just give up, and they're just like, I'm just going to liquidate for as much as I can. The long lasting bad part about that is that what happens to our economy if 12 million businesses, all right, let's say 80% of them go away? What happens?
Right.
Like, what happens to our chambers of commerce? What happens to our cities? What happens to our downtowns? What happens?
Right.
Because retail is a big one. Retail and restaurant are big ones because they require people, and people are hard to come by. Right.
Exactly. What are buyers looking for in a business? Now, I personally think that there's going to be a lot more interest in business ownership, because I think there are people who maybe they're doing DoorDash now, and they're doing Uber, and they're kind of doing the side hustle, and they're getting a taste of that. Maybe they will want to buy a business.
Right.
So, so what are buyers looking for when they're evaluating a business? Some people want to do something completely different. Some people think, whatever. So what do you think are like the things that a buyer is looking for?
I think, So it depends what kind of buyer. If I wanted to be a buyer of a business that I don't want to run myself, I'm going to only look at professionalized companies. In other words, companies where the owner is not doing everything. Because if I buy that business that the owner is doing everything and overseeing everything, I'm going to have to now do this or find somebody and some kind of operator to do that.
Right.
And so doesn't mean it's off the table. It just means that's kind of maybe what I'm looking for. But other people, like I had a gentleman, Michael, and he owned a restaurant company, a catering. And COVID was hard on him in Jersey for 35 years. Okay. Now he had done millions and millions in sales prior. COVID was a rough one because people weren't gathering and he was doing a lot of catering, but he had those contracts. And so he was discussing with us, like, should I, shouldn't I, what is it worth now based on post-COVID numbers, but also what do I have to do? What is it going to take for me to be able to sell it? And do I want to do that? Right. So we were doing that. And some of my suggestions were him was like, okay, if you want someone to just buy it out entirely, fine. That's a very finite group of people. But what if you had somebody that you could get from a culinary school who dreams of owning their own restaurants and that you taught them all the things? Maybe you don't exit entirely. Maybe you exit 50%, but you bring them up in it so they can now run it, right? It's like adopting a kid who's going to take it over. That is a possibility for people. He chose not to sell, actually. He actually just decided to give himself a year. He's going to enjoy the year and call it. And again, that's the thing about exit planning is like you at least weigh out all the options and think about who might this be? What am I willing to do? And you figure out those things and then you make a plan from that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, it broke my heart a little because he had a 35-year-old business with contracts in place. There's value there.
Right. Where you're building a catering business specifically.
Yeah.
And you're in a community for 35 years. You've got so much brand equity in that community that generations of people who have celebrated or whatnot. And so they know the name, they trust it. You're right. There's a tremendous amount of value there.
Yep, there is. And it's just going to just disappear. And there'll be a vacuum.
He's just going to do it and just
He's going to call it. He's going to turn the lights off and call it and sell it all. And I mean, that's his decision, right? We tried to talk him out of it because I love businesses and I hate to see
you were tempted to buy into it, weren't you?
Right. No, the part of me, the ADHD person was like, well, I thought about it for a minute because I can't help myself.
Don't lie. You did.
But I mean, it's like that kind of thing. It's like, geez. So like buyers it depends what they're looking for. So buyers that have bought before are looking for specific things. So like from a seller perspective, I kind of came up with a list for myself that I actually share with our clients, and that it's like, I call it my seller's checklist. And it's like, okay, are you working in this business? Okay, how much, right? If you are, what can you delegate? Who can you train? How can you replace yourself in this business, right? Is it transferable? Right. Or is this a job? Right. Because if it's a job, it's not really a business. I mean, that hurts a lot of people. But the reality is, if it's a job and you only do it, like I had Wolfgang was one of my solopreneurs who we did a workshop together. And, he had gotten rid of all of his staff and COVID and all that. And now he had to decide, am I going to bring them all back as subcontractor? He had all this equipment to be able to have something to sell, or do I just liquidate now? Right. And he decided to go all in and start to build back and get himself, because it was him and his wife. Right. Well, they're not going with the business. That's the whole point of selling. Right. I have another guy, Jim, who is an electrician, and he was thinking in a couple of years, and he was going to sell it to his employees, but his employees could only pay so much. And he's invested emotionally. So we came up with a plan for him. And he actually just found a different buyer because he separated things. But one of the strategies was, you're of an age. There's a lot of people who do what you do in your town who also want to exit. Why not scoop them up and then add them to yours? Now, all of a sudden, you've doubled and tripled your business and the value. Right. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But so, okay, what are buyers looking for? They're looking for something that's transferable easily. Right. Okay. Some people are looking for a fire sale, right? they're looking to say, hey, I heard a podcast the other day and she said, when my buyer, she buys boring, like old businesses, and so he said to her something from his AOL account. And she was like, oh, I want to buy your business. It's like, who's on AOL? Right? It's like, but that person probably has not kept up with the times. They probably have not instituted the tech that would make a lot of their job or life easier and more profitable. And they probably haven't raised prices. So there's a quick gain if you buy a business just by raising prices, making a new offer. Because, I'll give you a story. My husband is a contractor, carpenter. And he's always worked for himself, and he's just always worked on referrals. And so, but he saw we do flips now, and he had to hire someone, and they were hiring at $75 an hour. And he had maxed out at like 45. And he was like, they're charging what? And I said, yeah, because you haven't come along with the times, in the sense, like, you at this point, if you need a builder, you need a plumber, you need an electrician, you'll pay whatever they ask because you need them to come.
Right.
Whereas my husband is stuck a little bit back in the 80s and 90s. Right. But he has way more knowledge
right.
than any of these guys, charging double what he was.
Right.
Right. And that same is true in a business. Like, you get so in it, you're like, nobody will ever pay that. I'll tell you, I own a candy store. I charge $14 a pound for candy. And my husband's like, no one would pay that. And I'm like, they do every day. It's just a different mindset, right? Because
it's funny you say that. I just had someone on the podcast. We're talking about the traditional, the currency of the photo industry used to be the 4x6 print, right? The snapshot.
Yeah.
And this person was talking about how, there's so much value there that people don't understand that. And people are charging, 18, 17, 15 cents for that when they could easily double it, because it's not as price sensitive as it used to be. Because it's a different value equation, just like candy is, right? You can buy candy at any corner convenience store, at every gas station, whatever. But I bet if I walked into Tracy Gunn's candy shop, I would see something that I wouldn't see there. And that's why you get $14 a pound.
Or 300 jars to pick from, where you can make your own custom bag. I'm selling a service, not a product.
Right. That's a whole other conversation we have.
It is another, but the point is
but that's a great point. Great point.
As a seller, think about, like, what would a buyer be able to make their money back? Right? Would the money go down the tube?
And over what period of time?
Right. I mean, sometimes it's really fast because it's new eyes, new blood, new conversation, fresh, with more experience or different experience.
Exactly.
In an old model. I mean, and the other thing I think to yourself is, okay, if you're looking for a buyer, thinking about, like, if I handed this over, let's just say the perfect buyer showed up today and they offered me $1 million and I could walk away, would it fall apart if I left?
$1 million.
So what would it fall apart?
Yeah.
If I wasn't here with all the Band-Aids and making sure, is it transferable? Because nobody wants to buy a business that's going to fall apart. Right. Nobody buys a business thinking it's going to fail. It happens.
Sure. But no one gets into business with the idea that it's going to fail unless you're wanting to do it for tax reasons or something. I don't know anybody who does that except in the movies. No. Right, so where can people go to reach out to you for more information about you and the types of programs you offer? So
getexitable.com is like our homepage hub, and that'll kind of like get you in our little world. We do have an offer for your listeners if they wanted to start thinking about exit plan. And I say this with all sincerity. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about, like, I wish I could sell yesterday, I wish I could sell next year, or in 20 years. The simple fact is you really should consider some type of plan, right? They say, I used to have an airport restaurant, and the pilots would say, if you take off, if you're just a little bit off, you're going to wind up in Seattle instead of LA. If your trajectory, you need to know where you're going, and you got to have it like a pinpoint on a map, just so when you get off course, you have a way to correct. right?
Right.
And so that is true. Sorry, I'm bringing up I want to tell you the right thing. So it's get exitable / exit plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put a link on the homepage just so it makes it easier. But it's getexitable.com or tracygunn.com is me, and I'm on all the socials. So let's be friends.
Well, thank you, Tracy, for your time and everything, and looking forward to reconnecting with you in the future.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.